Today's presentation is called Flowers for the World and is the collaboration of Jan and yours truly. We celebrate flowers as they represent the values expressed in our sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. That bears repeating. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. How can we use flowers to illustrate this principle, you ask? We believe we can. First, the flower that represents peace is the lily. The one that represents liberty is the bird of paradise. The black-eyed Susan represents justice. Almost every country in the world has a national flower, using these three symbols of peace, liberty, and justice as the core of our flower ceremony. Just as they are the core of the sixth principle, we shall build our beautiful international bouquet, one flower at a time. The flower communion ceremony was initiated and created by Norbert Čapek, almost 100 years ago, 99 to be exact, in response to members of their newly created congregation in Prague desiring a more spiritual component to their worship. Their celebration was similar to what we have done in our sanctuary here in the past. Each congregant would bring a flower to the service to be placed in a large central vase. At the end of the service, each person would take home a different flower. This symbolizes the uniqueness of individuals and the coming together in communion to share this uniqueness. This slide is a picture of our vase 3 years ago when we were all together in the sanctuary. Čapek and his wife Maya were both Unitarian ministers. Maya was working in the US raising funds for their efforts in Czechoslovakia when World War II broke out. Norbert and his daughter, still in Eastern Europe, were arrested and tortured by the Gestapo. Čapek was exterminated at Dachau in 1942. The story of this era is not complete unless we also remember the Reverend Waite Still, and Martha Sharp, who helped refugees escape Nazi persecution in Germany beginning in 1939. They are credited with establishing what we know today as the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. We honor this branch of the UUA with our annual Guest at Your Table service and campaign. Their mission statement reads, "The UUSC advances human rights and social justice around the world, partnering with those who confront unjust power structures and mobilizing to challenge oppressive policies. Our work is grounded in the belief that all people have inherent power and dignity." UUSC works year-round, and you can explore the website to access ways to become involved. So, to flesh out our slim bouquet of 3 flowers, we'd like to add the national flowers that represent some of the countries and partners with whom the UUSC is currently working. First, for Mexico, we'll add a dahlia. CAPAS, the Congregational Accompaniment Program for Asylum Seekers, partners together with an organization called Al Otro Lado, the other side, to connect volunteers with families who have been separated at the Mexican border. The dahlia represents dignity. Vecina is a legal aid organization that resettles displaced persons. Vecina, which is not an acronym and means neighbor in Spanish, is based in Austin, Texas, and empowers immigrant justice advocates through mentoring attorneys, educating communities, and mobilizing volunteers. One of their most recent missions is to support Afghan families seeking asylum. The national flower of Afghanistan is the tulip. The tulip represents perfect love. There's an interesting story from Persian folklore, part true, part fable. Before Romeo and Juliet, there was Shireen and Farhad. The tragic tale has it that the first tulip bloomed from the blood of these two star-crossed lovers. Let us add a tulip, and by doing so, we add the component of love to our bouquet. The UUSJ, Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice, and the UUSC, our service committee, have joined forces to restore asylum to people at our southern border, where Mexican and Haitian populations are disproportionately targeted. In the past 12 months, spanning 2021 and 2022, over 700,000 expulsions have occurred. Also in Boston, the IFSI, the Immigrant Family Services Group, connects sponsors with Haitians who are released from detention and would otherwise be deported. We'll add hibiscus to represent the unity, love, and affection for Haiti, the country these people have been forced to leave.
The national flower of Honduras is the virgin orchid and will represent the partners in Honduras who work as water protectors. On February 25th, 2022, just 2 months ago, 8 Honduran human rights defenders who had been convicted as they tried to protect the population from being poisoned by the water from the Guapirol River were finally released. They were part of a legitimate protest camp called For Water and Life, protesting the pollution caused by the iron oxide mine on its shores. After a 30-month-long incarceration, their convictions were overturned in a win for human rights and the UUSC organization that supported them. The virgin orchid represents the national spirit, pride, and the identity of Honduras, and we add the virgin orchid. Victim Advocates International, VAI, seeks to hold Facebook responsible for stoking the hatred that caused Rohingya genocide. Rohingyans are a stateless Indo-Aryan ethnic group who predominantly follow Islam and reside in Rakhine State, Myanmar, previously known as Burma. It's believed that Facebook content increased anti-Rohingya sentiments so intensely that 750,000 of their population have fled Myanmar to seek refuge in other countries, such as Bangladesh. In 2020, the Rohingya youth petitioned Facebook for reparations, number 2, to acknowledge responsibility, number 3, for remediation, and 4, representation. There are 4 R's. There is no flower to symbolize home, so we've chosen Queen Anne's lace to represent a haven and sanctuary and to help a new house feel like a home. Along with this flower, we send along our prayers for the Rohingya people, whether they have settled in Bangladesh or remain in Myanmar. The national flower of Myanmar is the Pudauk, P-A-D-A-U-K, Pudauk, representing youth, love, and romance. It's interesting that the tree on which the flowers bloom is regarded as a symbol of strength and durability. These flowers that bloom in mid-April are closely associated with the New Year festival. People use them to decorate everything, including themselves, much like the tradition of the leis in Hawaii. Necklaces are presented to visitors to celebrate hospitality and goodwill. We would hope that the Myanmar people could share some of that hospitality and goodwill to their Rohingya population. The national flower of Ukraine, we all now know, is the sunflower, a sonyashnik. In response to Russian President Vladimir Putin's declaration of war against Ukraine on February 23rd, UUSC's president, Reverend Mary Catherine Mourn, issued the following response. The world is united in outrage at this act of aggression against the sovereign territory of an independent country. Putin's invasion of Ukraine breaks international law and risks plunging Europe into the most deadly war the continent has seen in decades. As people concerned with the humanitarian impact of any aggression or militarism, we condemn this criminal act. For the same reason, we call on the US and other Western powers to respect the rights and safety of people on all sides of the conflict. They must refrain from any actions in response to Putin's aggression, whether military or economic, that would harm civilians or otherwise violate human rights. A more recent post, I think it was last week, the UUSC declares, all powerful states must be held accountable to the principles of human rights. UUSC will monitor the situation in Ukraine closely and will share resources as they become available for those seeking to help people affected by the crisis. In the meantime, we join our prayers to those of people around the globe who cry out in this moment. We demand peace. We demand an end to bloodshed. We demand respect for human rights. The UUSC is ready as ever to help refugees from this latest of world crises. We've all seen the video or heard the story of the Ukrainian woman who passed out sunflower seeds to Russian soldiers to put in their pockets. So when you fall, sunflowers will grow. Long associated with joy and peace, sunflowers have recently come to symbolize strength and resistance. The flowers are not native to Ukraine. They come from North America and found their way to Eastern Europe in the mid-18th century, where they flourished. They also represent harmony, faith, and unending hope. A sunflower is ever reaching for the sun. Today, so are the people of Ukraine. We're going to leave the UUSC right now. Well, not literally, we're not really going to leave them. We're just going to move on and talk about an organization that some of us did not even know existed. I didn't. It's the UU at the UN. How many people knew this existed? Nobody. You did? No? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. 2 people. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General and former president of Portugal, tells us, human rights are being violated in so many places, but we don't give up because we know respect for human rights and human dignity is a basic condition for peace. The first UU at the UN office was opened in 1962, encouraged by Adlai Stevenson, a Unitarian, of course, who happened to be the US ambassador to the UN at the time. In a letter to the UUA president, he stated, "Our ultimate security lies in making the world more and more into a community. All of you have the opportunity to share in the answer and thus help us build a more peaceful world." He was encouraging UU congregations to appoint envoys to have a voice at the UN. Today, over 500 congregations have complied. And I would just like to nominate myself. If we decide to send a Cambrian representative, it could be me, that would be fine. This year, starting this week, as a matter of fact, the UU at the UN will sponsor the Intergenerational Spring Seminar. It will run from Earth Day, April 22nd, which is this Friday, through International Workers' Day on May 1st, and will address the theme, displacement and human rights, all in for climate justice. All important issues. It is hosted in partnership with the UU Ministry for Earth, UU Service Committee, the UUSC, we didn't leave them for long, and the Side with Love community. UU congregations around the world celebrate UU Sunday, the 3rd week of October, and we hope to engage in that celebration as well. We return with Mary to build our bouquet.
UU at UN has 2 programs in Ghana. Every Child is Our Child and Queen Mothers. For 15 years, the UU at the UN supported children affected by the AIDS epidemic. They stopped funding this program in 2020 due to changing landscapes, but the ECOC, Queen Mothers program, is still functioning and supports AIDS and sexual education and guidance for young girls and pays for the education of orphans who cannot be placed with relatives. The impala lily, Adenium multiflorum, the national flower of Ghana, has many symbolic meanings, the most common being purity and fertility. The sweet and innocent beauty of the lily flower has given it the association of fresh life and rebirth. But it is also perceived as an auspicious good luck flower. Since the desert rose plant is strong and adaptable to harsh climatic conditions, it is a symbol of strength, persistence, resilience, and hope. So as long as the impala lily, or the desert rose, is on your side, it seems you can accomplish many things. In India, the Holding program strives to advance social and economic empowerment and has done so for over 40 years. The Yakshi organization within that program works to promote the farming of wholesome, natural foods and where food sources are threatened by changes in land use. The lotus is the national flower of India. It is a sacred flower and occupies a unique position in the art and mythology of ancient India, and has been an auspicious symbol of Indian culture since time immemorial. Lotus is the symbol of purity, enlightenment, regeneration, and rebirth. Its characteristics are a perfect analogy for the human condition, even when its roots are in the dirtiest waters. The lotus produces the most beautiful flower. To end our presentation, we come to the United States of America, our country, our heart, and our inspiration to aspire to the goals of both the UUSC and the UU at the UN.
The national flower of the United States is the rose. The earliest history of the rose in the U.S. is from indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, but most modern roses were cultivated and brought into Europe from China. We have decided that the peace rose will be our flower represented today because there's a story which ties it into our bouquet very nicely. The hybrid tea rose was introduced in 1945. It has a remarkable history that started in France just before the German occupation in World War II. Francis Mailland, a third-generation rose breeder, managed to send budwood of a promising new rose known only as 3-35-40 to the United States, Germany, and Italy. The new rose was given the name Peace, as this was the hope for the world at the time. Coincidentally, the day chosen for the naming ceremony for peace was the same day that Berlin fell in World War II. So in 1986, more than 40 years later, during a ceremony at the White House Rose Garden, the rose was declared the national flower of the United States by President Ronald Reagan. We shall add the rose to our international bouquet. It looks really pretty, doesn't it? While the United States, as a beacon of hope to many, is not and has often not been the leader in human rights, our history of colonization and colonialism has manifested itself time and time again. Even now, our support of a Haitian leader who brutalizes his own people is in complete opposition to the UUSC's commitment to the people of that country who have been forced to flee. It's far from a perfect world, and we are far from a perfect country, but we can say that we are a more perfect union than many. And in conjunction with organizations like the UUSC and the UU at the UN, we endeavor to be more of a beacon than a bane. Our virtual bouquet of flowers from around the world is symbolic of our interconnectedness and our goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And so it is with humility and hope that we present our international bouquet. Flowers are part of our world. We appreciate them not only for their beauty, but also for their richness and the significance they add to our lives.
We will end our presentation today with a prayer for the world by Amy Petrie Shaw. Please respond with "We lift up our hearts." For all who die in war,
We lift up our hearts. For all who live in suffering in the aftermath of violence,
we lift up our hearts. For all who give their lives in smoke and flame,
we lift up our hearts. For all who go in honor of the dead,
we lift up our hearts. For all who have served, we lift up our hearts.
For our country and our world,
we lift up our hearts. For a planet that will find peace, we lift up our hearts.
For the young and the innocent,
we lift up our hearts. For the weary and the war-torn, we lift up our hearts.
For those who would pray,
we lift up our hearts. For those too angry to cry, we lift up our hearts.
For all of us, for the many names of God,
we lift up our hearts. Shanti, Shalom, peace, Salam, Amen.
Morning offering will now be given and received. Please keep in mind that this congregation is entirely self-governed by the democratic process. One of the privileges of our free church tradition is to provide all of the financial support for the many ministries from among ourselves. Generosity, therefore, is one of the spiritual values we recognize as central to our personal and institutional well-being. You are invited to participate in the blessing of giving. For those at home, please use one of the methods shown on the screen. Thank you.